Alicia is eager to get started. So, all right. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Parrish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm the Louis B. and Dorothy Coleman Chief Curator of Art and Education. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to someone very special tonight, and someone that I think most of you actually know. And she's also my predecessor. So it's the one and only Alicia G. Longwell. So welcome, Alicia. Welcome back. So as many of you know, Alicia holds the position that I'm holding now for over 3 decades. And she retired last October from the Parrish and is now happily doing consulting work in Florida. So we're very happy to have her tonight. And who better to lecture about the rich history of the Parrish as we celebrate our 125th anniversary than Alicia. And tonight she will actually talk about a very special era of innovation at the Parrish in the 1950s when Mrs. Rebecca Bowling Littlejohn took on the presidency of the Parrish Board of Trustees and began a crusade to rebrand and to revive the institution and bring it into the 20th century. Sounds familiar, right? So anyway, Alicia, throughout her tenure, she was really integral in building the museum's collection with major works by artists such as Ross Bleckner, Mary Heilman, Lonnie Holley, Elizabeth Payton, David Sally, Alan Shields, and the list goes on and on. She has also curated significant shows here, one of them being Sand, Memory, Meaning, and Metaphor in 2008, John Graham, Maverick Modernist in 2017, that was just about when I joined the Parrish, and Affinities for Abstraction, Women Artists on Eastern Long Island from the 1950 to 2020, and that was in 2021. She has also organized numerous survey exhibitions, including one about Dorothea Rockburn, an exhibition called North Fork, South Fork, East End Art Now in 2004, and many solo exhibitions with artists such as Barbara Bloom, Marston Hartley, Frederick Kiesler, Alan Shields, Esteban Vicente, and Jack Youngerman. And you can actually see some of these artists up right now in Artist Who's Parrish. So please give a warm welcome to to Alicia. Thank you.
Just make sure you can hear me. And if you can't, just tell me. I can certainly speak loudly and clearly, just like my mother taught me. I will do that. I feel like the little red hen. I have to admit, I didn't do all that all by myself. Over the years, I've had extraordinary colleagues here who have worked with me on exhibitions. I particularly want to thank Corinne, Caitlin, and Olivia here, Chris McNamara, have been by my side, for years. All that time, and I couldn't do without the fabulous staff here. I'm thrilled that Monica asked me to speak and join in the 125th year. I couldn't quite make it to the end, folks. I'm sorry. I feel like it's the Parrish at 125 and Alicia at, whatever. Alicia at time to retire. But here I am, and it's been a great joy to be asked to be here and to go back and reread some things and look at some things. And really, I was asked to think about Mrs. Littlejohn in that era. And I will, full disclosure, she is someone about whom the biography is a little patchy. As art historians like myself often do, we we don't make it up, but we make deductions from what we know and what we can hang our knowledge on. So I'm going to do, if you'll bear with me, I feel quite confident that everything that I'm going to tell you about Mrs. Littlejohn is really by the legacy that she left and how that has impacted the museum. I think we can deduce a lot about her schooling, what she did in Southampton when she was here, and as Corinne said, the collection speaks for itself. Much of it is on view. Let me just congratulate Corinne Caitlin, Brianna, Chris, Robin, all of you for that extraordinary exhibition that's up right now, right? Oh, that was one hard part to leave. It looks fantastic, and I'm going to talk a lot about how artists, again, have responded to Mrs. Littlejohn and the legacy that she left. So I'll begin. Well, we'll begin. I forgot that part. Do I advance here? That's not. Let's see. All my little buttons. Oh, here comes Olivia. Thank you. Okay. Did that not this? Can I use this? I have to use this. Okay. And this doesn't have a thing, a pointer. The green button. Thank you. This is so high-fangled, since I left. All right. I'm going to continue now. Am I going to point it somewhere? Am I just ridiculous? What? No, I tried those. Oh, we're out of that. Okay. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you. What am I? Who remembers this particular moment in the history? Some of you were here then. I know you were. I'll recap and go back a bit. You may remember in 1992, really extraordinary curator named Donna DeSalvo landed at the Parrish. She came with a real background in Warhol. I remember she came in January, and then the director, Trudy Kramer, said, you need to do a show, and it needs to be up the whole summer, so get cracking. Well, Donna, being Donna, called on a few people she knew, kicked around a few ideas, sat in the archives and in the vault with me for months. It was like seeing some incredible thing grow to an amazing look at this institution and its history. Donna had a lot of wonderful friends, a lot of wonderful artists who were friends, and one of them was Barbara Kruger. She said, Barbara, would you commission something for us? That was 1992, so not a year you would necessarily pin something on, but in 1992 it was time for a look back at what had gone on at the museum, introspective. As you remember, this was called A Museum Looks at Itself, a phrase that picked up on sort of current jargon, you might say. Barbara Kruger, who's an astonishing artist, and you must know her work from her years around the world with these, I shop, therefore I am, who can forget. She came up with this one in looking at the old photographs of the original installation, which I think probably Donna will talk about. I can plug this on June 30th, right, Olivia? 6 p.m., don't miss it. At any rate, Barbara sent this. We all loved it, and this became part of the exhibition. It was, at that point, a photo montage. What am I? And I think this is probably what Mrs. Littlejohn said to herself. What am I? What is the Parrish? When she first came to, in the 1950s, when she first really began to take an active part in the museum after a series of years when it was really moribund, really closed. Nothing much was going on, but I'll get back to that in a minute. So here's Donna, and she took her gimlet eye, shall we say, to look at this institution. There's the cover of the book. The book came out a year later, which is wonderful because we have the record of that exhibition. And it was called Past Imperfect at that time. A museum looks at itself, and that's Fred Wilson's guarded view there, the 4 guards in museum exhibitions. I'm not sure how he wrangled the uniforms, the real uniforms from the Whitney, the Met, the Guggenheim, and MoMA. And as you can see, they're all, as you can see by the necks and the arms, these people that are often nameless and faceless in museums are all of color. Fred is an artist who comes to these projects and brings enormous, with an economy of means, brings enormous statements to his work. And I'll get back to Fred because there's a work in the exhibition. At any rate, artists have always responded to the Parrish in many, many ways. And Donna first really uncovered it. This is just an example of of Barbara's work, Your Body is a Battleground. This was for the Women's March on Washington in 1989. Just to remember that moment, she makes us remember. Here's Mr. Parrish. This is a postcard, and I'm just going to run through this early moment because this is what Mrs. Littlejohn would have known this history, certainly. There's Parrish, probably known to you as the man who attended Harvard, pursued the law, didn't have that much interest in. He retired by 48 because he was much more interested in his classes on the Italian Renaissance and British history, and he had the means to travel and collect. He had some advisors about what to get, but he was really out on his own. He had come to reside in Southampton. He was a Philadelphia Quaker, but he wound up here in the Hamptons early on, as did his mother, at the Grosvenor Atterbury home, which is now the Historical Society. So he had this great love of these monuments of classical Greek and Roman art. These are almost all plaster reproductions. And you can see this is actually looking from the stage of the old concert hall, those who know that, into what was called the transept gallery. So that was a space that's really never been recreated with those pocket doors open there. It was an amazing building, added in 3 sections. He was devoted to it. He wanted to bring something of what he said of the Italian Renaissance to this small Puritan village. He didn't shy away from big ideas. This is in the far back there. You think this works? I think you can, the very famous sculpture from unearthed in Rome in 1506, I think, 16th century. 2 Germans spent much of the 18th century talking about this. It was called the Laocoon. It's that famous story from myth or of the war between the Trojans and the Greeks. And as the Trojan horse came in, he, as a Laocoon, as a priest of Poseidon, said with his sons, he said, let's just get our spears, and I know there's some Greeks in there. And of course, everyone thought he was crazy. And so Athena was so pissed off about this that she sent these giant serpents, whom you see consuming him and his 2 sons. And this statue so vivified, classical scholars and everyone who saw it, and all artists. It's been attributed single-handedly. The Baroque came out of this because of the expression. You don't see this kind of emotion and expression in much Greek and Roman or classical literature. So, he didn't shy away from those big ideas of bringing back a copy of a work like that. He also had a lot of other ideas. You can see the title there, I think, Government in the Tropics. Spoiler alert, he didn't think much of it. He was, as most people of that time, of his class, were extremely conservative, but he was not above pamphleteering, and the galleries would have been, but also the concert hall full of chairs to hear various speeches. In a way, art is always political, whatever the subject is. This is the view of Fred Wilson's guarded view, the 4 museum guards, which was borrowed to be in A Museum Looks at Itself. This is an installation picture of the exhibition in that transept gallery. You can see this red wall. Donna sort of, at one point anyway, we were going through a wall. These walls were lath and plaster, and covered in burlap, which, lath and plaster was sort of before drywall. You had to put something up between the uprights. So that's what it was, and covered with drywall, and a really paint sample. We did a core sample, and this intoxicating red came up. So the whole gallery was painted that way. And you'll see the first artist section here in the current exhibition is Joe Zucker's wall, the first one on the left going down the spine. And he has hung on a wall that recreates this moment as sort of an homage to Donna, but for bringing out this history, which is very interesting, I think. He chose, of course, the subject of ships, which also comes up regularly. You see the pieces of paper sort of tucked behind this, and this is what we would now call an artist intervention, but I don't even think we used that word in '92, I'm not sure. Fred Wilson, the artist who did The Guarded View, had been asked to come and do a tour of the exhibition because he often has done exhibitions himself. He went into the Maryland Historical Society and did these astonishing selections from the collection of a beautiful Georgian silver ewer and a pair of manacles, slaves' manacles. Both items in the museum never had been shown together, and again, in this way that the artist presents it and you think about it. And it takes it, it keeps it with you. So Fred came to do a tour, and we didn't know much. He showed up and he asked if he could get a hold of a copy of any history of art, Jansen, anything. He said he needed to do something with it. Well, this sent fear into all of them. We don't, you can't have the one in the library, I don't know. Someone had the brilliant idea to go next door to the library, which had book sales, right? Found an old copy and gave it to Fred. Well, Fred he discoursed brilliantly on Italian painting. He just talked about everything in the show, but in his hand was the book, which he was, I guess manipulating is a good term, and then he would rip out a page and put it in. Several of the docents fainted dead away. It was a moment, everybody went, oh God, what's he gonna do? But as you can see, ultimately, it was, nothing was damaged except a few docents. And these were left as part of the exhibition after. That's a palimpsest of what had gone on. Now, what's interesting is while he was ripping and turning, he was also just turning the book upside down, increasing and, And at the end, he said, Fred, what are you going to do with that? He goes, it's your, give it to the museum in the collection. You will see that in Nanette Carter's gallery, which is, help me out, past in which number? 6. All right, you will see that Nanette has included that. It's in a vitrine, and it's now this reminder of that moment, and very extraordinary to have a work by Fred. So you see the Parrish, this founding, which comes back to us in so many ways and underlies really what Mrs. Littlejohn came to do. This is the irresistible old postcard. Down at the bottom you might say, "Don't you think this nice?" It's written in the script at the bottom. So it was very nice. And for many years, people came. It was very much like the front galleries in the Met. Everyone had these collections of plaster casts. But at a point, it became less and less visited. The Parrish died in '32. He did not leave a lot of money. His widow complained about any money that the museum needed to run. Eventually, the estate gave the Parrish to the village. And that's where just a little bit Mrs. Littlejohn comes in, so that actually during the Depression years and the war years into the 40s, it was really neglected. This is what much of this statuary would become broken in handling. It's, it's only plaster. It's not that much marble. They were mostly that. So this was what the old crypt or basement looked like over on Job's Lane. Not a pretty sight. And in her left, Mrs. Littlejohn, who really had the idea. This is one of the very few pictures we have of her, actually. She was well into her 70s. She was born in 1873 in West Virginia. But she, not a connoisseur of painting, not a big collector of art at all, but I think, and she had a rather, I'm not sure, this gentleman may be a second husband, but she married fairly early on, certainly by her 30s, she was married to Robert Malcolm Littlejohn. Of course, she took his name, and they had a house in Southampton. This is 107 Little Plains Road. It's a Burrell house built in the 1890s for the Lee family. And they had purchased it after the Lees had passed away. It's a beautiful house. She entertained. The New York Times will say things like bridge and dinner at Littlecote. That was its original name, Littlecote. And she had, I would think, a fairly conventional life. She had a daughter married there. And I think you have to go back into what we know of her education and what she studied to really sort of piece together why this woman at this, I would say that was, I won't say advanced, of course, 72 is young, but that was in those days, most 70-year-olds had pretty much gone into retirement. Not her. So we'll go back to let's go back to 1849. What happened in 1849? Anybody? In upstate New York? Seneca Falls. Ding, ding. All right. Anybody watching Jeopardy these days, right? The finals. This was a group of women who got together because in 1840 they had gone with their husbands to an anti-abolitionist meeting. They were certified delegates. So they'd gone to London and they were escorted up to the viewing area. And they all said, we're representatives. And they said, too bad you have to sit, up there. It's only men on the floor of the convention. They were so appalled by, that reaction to their abolitionist sentiments and their needs, and they worked as hard as their husbands, but their husbands were seated and they were not. So some women from this group, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, others I could name, but they came back and started to talk about having a women's convention here in the US to talk about women's rights and platform issues they would like to advance, like abolition. And this is Sarah Peter, this bust on the right, who knew Lucretia Mott and all these women, and she was a go-getter herself. In 1949, she founded the Philadelphia School of Art and Design for Women. And this was an institution that was teaching industrial design, crafts like weaving, designs for carpeting, things that would allow what you might call underprivileged women who had had hard times, for one who had no male support, who needed to work to have an income for families. This would help them on their way to having a marketable skill. There were prototypes in England that had been instituted even earlier. But she was, in fact, married to the British consul in Philadelphia, and they were in England a lot, and she had this idea. She said, I want to do this. I'll found it in my house. And she did that for many, many years. So it was the Philadelphia School of Art and Design for Women. It was very, particularly after the Civil War, when so many women were left as widows with absolutely no means of support, it became very popular. Eventually it had a fine arts section move, but and I want to show another work in the collection. This is not actually from Mrs. Littlejohn, but from her good friend in the Clark collection. But I always look at this. This is dated 1849, and this is Thomas Harrison Matson, who was a well-known, you would say, a genre painter. He loved these scenes of sort of country life. He lived up in Sherborn, which is not far from Seneca. I would no doubt have heard about that the year before. And he titled this piece, which is a beautiful painting, as you can see. I don't think it's on view, right? No, artist wasn't selected, right? It's a favorite of mine, and it's titled Now or Never. And obviously that could be a definite reference there to the, well, let's just say the whole painting is full of iconography as a Renaissance painting. You see the, fading vegetables there in the bottom, etc. Well, it could refer to this bounder who's come in and obviously moving in for a kiss. But then again, it could be, as I say, there's a clock, which is a little hard to see up on that mantel, way in the background. They're her parents or some aged crones over by a fire. The fruit is wilting, and she's sitting in the breeze. This beautiful spring air is coming in. Those little plants on the windowsill are thriving, and she's looking very wistful, like, let me get out of this place. And maybe not even with this guy who's come in for whatever reason, traveling salesman, who knows. But I always thought, well, maybe Matson was really thinking about Seneca Falls, and he just thought that maybe what this young woman was thinking about too. So I put that in as this very same era. Did I go backwards? Yeah, I did. This is the house the next house that was in. The school grew. At one point, she affiliated with the Franklin Institute, that very, extraordinary and prestigious Philadelphia group. But they, as you can see, they also came into studying from the flat. In other words, painting from other portraits, or not so much painting from plaster casts. But you can see other things here with the women. And these were all published in, the leading magazines like Leslie's and Godey's. And I love this photo. This is from about the 1850s, I think, of a class, which has kind of gotten into the least amount of space there. But I wish I could tell you the exact dates of Mrs. Littlejohn's schooling there. And in fact, the librarian at the school is working on that. She's apologized for I called way back in February, but they're still working on it. Apparently all the records are by hand and you have to go through everyone. I said she was born in 73. She could have been there by 1880 or a bit later, but that's probably hits it right for Mrs. Littlejohn. What is important, that the woman you see on the left, whose name is Emily Sartain, and she was the director from 1880 to actually 1885 until 1920. So she has to have been the director there when Mrs. Littlejohn was there as a student. And I'm going to find out. I'm going to continue this research. But there she is as a young woman on the right. The older man in the foreground is her father, John Sartain, a Brit who started out as being the head of the school. So he, in fact, practically invented mezzotype, which was if you've ever seen the old prints that look like a painting, people would, copy into an etching this mezzotint. It's a process like that, but it exactly was the same as the image in a painting, and they became very popular because they could be widely distributed and sold. So being able to make a mezzotint could be a source of income. Well, Emily Sartain, although she was a director of a women's school for many years and probably had, she had an earlier life, I discovered. And there she is on the left with her very good friend, fellow Philadelphian. They went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts together as young women, and that's Mary Cassatt. They went for about 3 years. Mary Cassatt was not happy her parents were not happy about that, going to that school, because it had gotten sort of a reputation for men and women together in too close proximity. And there's probably a name you'll remember who was actually a fellow student with them, one Thomas Akins, who really got a bad reputation there. But he apparently and Emily had a relationship, no details, but that's his sketch for her on the left, a portrait sketch. Apparently he never did a full scale one of that. Emily and Mary Cassatt went to Europe together. This is before, well, she did it to sort of get away from Akins, I think. But she was happy to be with Mary there. She never really thought of herself to be an artist of that level. Mary was they were both studying sort of privately in studios there in Paris. And Mary, as we know, stayed on and became part of the Impressionists. I mean, certainly the darling of Degas, they all admired her work tremendously. There I have Mr. Akins again. And what I think Mrs. Littlejohn really, and I'm showing this Cassatt on the left, which is, of course, not in our collection, but the thing, what Mrs. Littlejohn really loved about Mary Cassatt, or I'm assuming she did, was the way she painted, and these broad patches of color. On the right, you see Mary Cassatt with the umbrella there, and Mrs. Paul Durand-Ruel. This was the big dealer of Impressionists in France, who had a large exhibition of these Impressionists in America. My point being that nobody was looking, collectors weren't looking at American art. They were not interested in it by and large. A genre scene like Matson might have sold to someone, but by and large, if they had the money and wanted the prestige, they were collecting French Impressionists. And this went on for a very, very long time. And Durand-Ruel was the one who was the exponent of that. But what Mrs. Littlejohn had was a collection of Japanese prints. And I think you can see, well, again, the boating party, but on the left is a Mary Cassatt. On the, oh, hello, did I skip some? Oh, okay. On the left here is a Mary Cassatt print, and on the right is one in the collection of Mrs. Littlejohn, which was, everything was bequeathed to the museum. It's interesting, we know very little about the history of what was, it'd be nice if we can look up and see what she paid for a William Merritt Chase, in 1950. It was not much. American painting was very underrated. But she did love the Japanese prints, which she did buy. I mean, she bought the Chase, but she was always very interested in these Japanese prints. And I think there's a real through line through Emily Sartain and Mary Cassatt and this passion she had. We must have over, 300, 400, I mean, a lot. A big collection that she had. And then to go back and say that we don't know much about the collecting history because all the paintings were bequeathed, in other words, put in her will to come to the parish at her demise. So it's not like the money came through the parish and it was purchased, but that's aside. But I thought a nice comparison here between the two figures. So she loved this, and we know really where she might have been sparked this interest in Japanese prints. Now, about the fact that she collected American prints. So we get to the point that she is thinking about this museum. Now, there's a history of women building their own museums, women thinking about opening museums. She would definitely have known about Mrs. Gardner, Mrs. Jack, as she's called, in the gorgeous palazzo that she built in Boston. Everybody been there? Do go, as you know. It's really something. Now, these women had the means to have advisors. This is a photograph on the left, which is in a case at the Gardner of a very angelic young Bernard Berenson. He was a kid, right out of school, right out of Harvard, and he was her advisor for 50 years. Mrs. Littlejohn didn't have anything quite like that advising her. These three ladies, Lily Bliss, Mary Quinn, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, 1929, they got together and founded a museum too. A lot of knowledge, Mary Quinn, and also Lily Bliss, a big collector, Rockefeller as well, and Rockefeller had the means, but no one of these husbands were funding, aside from Mrs. Gardner, but then he was kind of gone by the time she got going. They really had a lot of drive to open these museums, and this is, of course, the MoMA on 54th Street, just behind where the museum is now, or just on the other side of 54th, and the angelic-looking Alfred Barr, again, a kid out of our, highly recommended, but, you know, a real young scholar on the way up. So Mrs. Littlejohn sort of discovered something else. The building on the far, oh, here I have it. The postcard on the left is the founding image. It was brick. It was this beautiful brick. Grosvenor Atterbury was a very progressive architect who had been hired by Parrish. What was the old Cross Gallery was the first part built, and the concert hall was built on the back, and then the wing to the street. So this is, of course, the facade on Job's Lane still. And if you've ever noticed, and the next time you go down Job's Lane, he used something called lammy brick, which was an overbaked brick. It's so overbaked it has black, you know, smoke marks all over it. He liked the surface that gave, and that was an old trick in the Renaissance too, to vary the bricks so that you had a real animated pattern on the facade, so it wasn't just brick, you know, straight brick. Anyway, that was that facade, and then I don't know, it's the biggest tragedy that ever happened, but in the 1940s there was a real trend toward a sort of colonial look. Everybody was painting things white, even brick. So it was painted white in the 40s, and lots of people were upset. Someone on the board was, I mean, the museum was run at that point not very well, and by a very small group of people who kind of did what they wanted. And so by the time Mrs. Littlejohn arrived, that white had sort of gone away, and she was adamant about not repainting it. She said, we will never do that. We're going to keep the same, the original facade, and when you see it today. So it's really all the white has almost all worn away. But she was absolutely for returning to the original, and what she found was an institution that just sort of opened the door and nothing much happened in the summer months. And what she did to come in, and obviously this must have taken, although she wasn't terribly wealthy, her husband had died by that time, she had the means to help the museum along. And I think, you know, it's her background with the school in Philadelphia and people like Emily Sartain, that she had this idea that, you know, something could be done for the betterment of people. This was a crusade, really, and she took it up because she didn't want to see this institution, you know, really founder and close the doors and not be open. It was pretty close to that at that point. So what did she do? I mean, she would have known the history of the school in Philadelphia, how you get a charter from the, you know, education department of the government, and that's one of the first things she did. We get a charter from the Board of Regents of the state of New York, and if you go online now and look to see what nonprofits do, it's the same thing. You need that. You need to prove you're an educational institution. You need to prove you know, let people in at some point for free. You can have membership, but you have to have days you're open. So she said about that, she hired the first guard. That's John Babuca there on the left. In the back is Samuel Johnson Sr. Some of you may know Sammy Jr., who worked with the Jitney for many years. Sam was her driver. Sam brought the paintings back and forth from New York the whole time. She still had a home in New York. She was mostly always here. And her first director was now Valentine Arbogast, not a name that trips off the tongue or that you're going to find in Wikipedia, because I looked. And he was, I think there was one painting at one point by him, but which is already a bad sign that the director has a painting there. So I think I wouldn't accuse him of, you know, cooking the books or anything else. He was not a Berenson or a, you know, an Alfred Barr, let's be honest. But she did have a director who took over things. She put a heating there. You can see the little heater. Still to this day, it's there. And opened up, you know, more year-round, had exhibitions. And pretty soon afterwards, some local artists said, please take those statues outside because we really need to have more room for art or people or something. And she thought, that's pretty good advice. So that's how the Caesars got outside. Very early on, she had a student art show. That was part of the exhibition schedule. And she, this is one from a couple of years ago, that fantastic piece there from the school in Bridgehampton. And that's what she did. And she started to collect. And American art, as I've said, was extraordinarily undervalued. I mean, if you were collecting art in a big way, you wanted to collect French Impressionism. And that's what people were doing. I mean, I forget, America Saat's best friend was Louisine Havemeyer. And that's what, most appealed until a young man from Indiana got to New York. But there we are. That's William Merritt Chase. American art, I always love the story of Barbara Novak, whose name you may recognize, really the most distinguished American art historian, one of the best there were. She was at Columbia in the 50s. She's the one who came up with the term for all those beautiful paintings like Ken said, and she came up with the term luminism. I mean, somebody has to come up with these isms, right? And she did. She said, these aren't impressionists, these aren't this. This is American painting, it's unique, and I'm gonna call it luminism. Well, everybody went, that is brilliant. And that's it. She couldn't get a degree in American art, her doctorate, there at Columbia in American art. They said, oh, are you kidding? We don't award doctorates in that study. It was absolutely not regarded as a scholarly endeavor. So she kind of clutched it around and did get her degree, but I think she had to get it from, well, I don't know. But she did get a degree from, I think she had to work in a little classicism there, but that's how different it was in those days. Mrs. Littlejohn, very early on, thought that, well, one brilliant thing she did is that the museum up to that point, Parrish had never had his name on the building, and he called it the Art Gallery at Southampton. After he passed away, it was sometimes called the Memorial Art Gallery, or Parrish. She felt very strongly, although she moved a lot of the, of course, sculpture was gone, destroyed. She moved a lot sort of to the perimeters of the space, but she felt it should really be called the Parrish Art Museum because he started it and did so much to build it. So it became the Parrish Art Museum then, and that was a rebranding. She really reinvented the museum, brought it into the 20th century, you'd have to say, really, about everything she did. And she did have this capital idea of collecting artists who had lived and worked in this area. And is it really 6:54? Okay, I'm gonna speed this up. Is it? What is it? Yeah, okay, I'm going. Here you can see, I'm gonna go quickly through, because this is, I'm gonna talk about what she did bring into the collection quickly. This is my point. I mean, you could obviously see this Japanese effect on Chase and all the painters, and she loved this. This is, of course, the beginning of her Chase collection, collecting these works. These were all collected in the 50s, bequeathed to the museum, and she died in 1961. So this is a really short, it's brief for a decade. This was the park in Brooklyn she loved. Chase moved to Brooklyn. And of course, Chase studied abroad. He got back, and he really got tired of people buying French paintings. So he said, I'm going to do this one better. I'm going to take up this whatever. He didn't go to Paris because he didn't want to get Frenchified. But then he, as he called it, he did say, I'm going to do parks. I'm going to do people in parks. I'm going to do women going into parks, which is what, it's this idea of the flaneur, that people get out and enjoy. He did Central Park. And then, of course, he was called to start the school here in the Shinnecock Hills. And there, of course, is the bayberry bush. There are a few chases on view. And this is a wonderful portrait. Moran, she discovered almost, she loved Moran. Moran was, of course, in East Hampton. This is a beautiful watercolor and gouache that she bought, Marvatio in Old Mexico. Contemporary artists, there are just a few here, but she started, I'm going to break the news, neither Pollock nor Krasner, who did participate in contemporary art shows, she did not purchase, but she bought the first Fairfield Porter to enter the collection. it's Porter, Larry Rivers, and John Graham, which formed this little triangle on South Main and Little Plains. They were right here. I know she bought the Larry Rivers from Robert Keene's bookshop, which some of you may remember on, right? He was a bird. Married briefly to Grace Hardigan. But the Porter, she could well have gone to the studio there. No question, this is from 53. It's an early work. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a big painting. The Larry Rivers this is astonishing early period when he was doing these sort of proto-pop, but beautiful portraits. He did it. This is his son. This is Larry Rivers' son, Joe. Unfortunately, he did a nude study of Joe, which Bob Keene put up in the store on South Main Street, on Main Street, and the police arrested Robert Keene. And Larry, too, I think. They just said, this is obscenity. The thing about it is Joe was in school at Southampton High School, so I always felt like that was pretty rough for a kid to have this nude drawing up on down the street. And, of course, John Graham, I mean, come on. I mean, she had to have known him or seen him or known him through Keene, who could well have, said, yeah, that's a drawing from 1953. The little-known fact that John Graham, the great international traveler, was right here on South Main. And there he is, actually over in East Hampton at Leo Castelli's house with Rosenberg and de Kooning, and I can't resist. Paul Bruck said the first time I saw a Lacoste shirt was on John Graham. Nobody wore those things. You can see it still is stitches up on the side. Now, I just want to say two more. I find it astonishing that Mrs. Littlejohn collected these works. These, in fact, she gave to the museum right away from 1956. This is Bert Silverman. This is Harvey Dinnerstein. And they were two young Lower East Side kids. They'd been through Cooper Union together. They stayed friends their whole lives, better known as illustrators. They heard about the Montgomery bus boycott, which was late in 55. They said, let's go, when we go down, we want to go, they wanted to illustrate things and make drawings and bring these back. And this is the one that Bert did there. Bert said, we got on a train in New York, and when we left Washington, I noticed before we did, all the black people had gone to the rear of the train. They had never seen anything like this before. And in fact, segregation trains were still segregated at that point. They went on down and they went in the streets. This boycott, this went on, for a year, the bus. And the women, everybody had to walk. Didn't take the buses. It was an extraordinary time. And they went to Montgomery. And this is Bert's, Harvey Dinnerstein's, sorry. This is women walking in Montgomery, a protest walk. So she was collecting in a lot of ways that we haven't often thought about. I think it really goes back to, she was very exposed to late 19th century art. Also, Henry was hired by Emily Sartain. Henry was a teacher at that school. And that Philadelphia group of artists and Henry, who's Sloan. You see Sloan's in our collection, Henry in the collection, Luke Sklackens, all those guys. She would have known about them from her time in Philadelphia at that school. And she would have known to just get in touch when she heard about like Silverman and Dinnerstein, what they were doing. She bought those drawings and gave them to the museum. And here she is. And that's my talk today. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. I know everybody has a lot of things to do, but I'd be happy to, if anyone has a question, wants to ask me here, or ask out loud, or yes?
There's a show at the Historical Museum right now. Renaissance paintings that Parrish collected. And there's a lovely little video that talks about, it essentially throws Mrs. Littlejohn under the bus.
It throws what?
Throws Mrs. Littlejohn under the bus for having taken all of these old paintings down and not taking care of them and not giving them their due. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? I know Terry took me into the vaults once at the old building and said, here are all the old Renaissance paintings.
It's nothing, they're right where they were. I mean, I took care of them for 40 years. They're not in terrible shape, they were never.
They're fine, it's just, they're neglected, they're like,
They're often not shown. Everything was thoroughly reviewed by the Lehman Collection at the Met. There is one that is an authentic, that would be judged an authentic. There was a lot of paintings, that Parrish picked up that he didn't really know. There are notes on the back like, I bought this from Senior, or, so-and-so, it was his daughter's wedding day, and he was trying to raise a dowry. So, he was taking, Parrish was not a connoisseur in that sense. There are many very beautiful paintings, but that was just very, Mrs. Littlejohn didn't want to stay a museum of Italian. They're copies, by and large. They're copies. There is probably only one by a painter, a Ligurian painter named R.E. Ray. But they weren't, they were on the walls when she came. And I think she just wanted to make room for it. They did the first Chase retrospective, like 3 years into her tenure. I mean, they brought paintings from the Met for shows. A lot of paintings were organized by the Met for the Parrish. I think she wanted to do something. I mean, it had been exactly where they had been for nearly, almost 60 years at that point. She wanted to reinvigorate the museum to get, the walls hadn't changed in 60 years, and why it was no surprise that people weren't coming to see it. So.
I'm applauding her.
I thought.
I'm not saying anything against her.
Oh.
I'm just saying that if you go to the exhibition at the Southampton Historical Society.
I'd love to. I will.
She comes off as having sort of not given these artists their due, of just, not taking care of the paintings. When I say the Southampton Historical Museum, and I'm sorry if there's anybody here, but they sort of didn't, they don't give Mrs. Littlejohn her due.
Well, I'm going to see about that. I haven't been. I'm sorry, I can't see with the glare. Who's talking?
Frank.
Oh, Mary, I knew. I'm so sorry, I cannot see from the light here. Well, all of this. Yeah, I don't know. That's that sells newspapers, whatever. That's a story. Bad old Miss Littlejohn, but. Well, it kind of goes back to the whole thing. I mean, there are people in Southampton who wish it had never changed since 1897, let's be honest. I mean, not Southampton, singular. I mean that, that's not what I meant. Some people would be perfectly happy if it was still like that, quaint. And, you've seen old collections at schools in Connecticut. Some people still have plasters out, it's true. Forgive me, Mary, I can't see you. Well, I'm appalled about that, and I'm going over there. I'm going to have to see. She just really wanted the museum to survive, I think. New thoughts come in. Yes?
Hi, can I clarify, because actually I haven't seen this exhibit at the Historical Society yet, but I was curious to know where I'm aware that there were reproductions, but does the Parrish Art Museum own those original Parrish reproductions, or did it go with the building back to the village?
Copies. Those remain with the village. Those were given by the estate to the village. Everything collected since Mrs. Littlejohn, she was very, very clear. I mean, she got the charter, she got the name. So anything coming into the collection after that is this entity, which is now the Parrish Art Museum.
That's very interesting. That is.
Yeah, that's very clear. That those were deeded, given. The estate said, good God, village, please take the building, the grounds, and these paintings. Yeah, and what's left of, there are like 2 statues left, besides the ones outside. Yeah, yes.
Alicia, this is Monica. Thank you.
Yes, I see. Thank you, and I didn't thank you. Monica invited me. She's the reason I'm here, so thank you, Monica.
I just requested that this be an annual talk with you.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you. I know.
Alicia, I know you've been retired only a handful of months.
Yes.
It's interesting to see the impact of this one single woman in an institution like the parish,
Yeah.
her legacy. And it's not a fair question to you, but what do you hope or what do you think your own legacy might be? If you want to have that reflection with us. If not, I understand. But it must be kind of like, oh, I'm talking about Mrs. Littlejohn, and you had a almost 40-year tenure.
Yeah, yeah.
Your influence is still very heartfelt and
Well, I mean, nothing I did, well, I really did alone. And I must say that the acquisitions that were named, I'm thrilled that those came in when I had a chance to advocate for someone or do that. Everything comes before the board. Everything needs the consensus of the curatorial department. But for the things some were mentioned that I really feel like I had a role in bringing into the collection, I'm very, very proud about that. And certainly what I look back on is working with the artists, just front and center. That's always been a tremendous joy. And then to get back to some of the chances I had to do an exhibition, like that one called Sand, right? Do we remember that one? That was just, I had a clip file that I just thrown things in for years that had sand and art, sand and picture, painting center. Sand was the main thing. Hourglasses, just anything that was about an artist taking sand into their work. So to be able to bring something together like that from a wide number of sources and ideas and to sort of bring it all into what I hope was a focused exhibition. Yeah, I would.
thank you.
Yeah.
And quick question, knowing the collection as well as you do, what is your take on the Artists Choose Paris exhibition? Because what it is a lot of narratives that we have never seen. And
Yes.
that only the artist showing
Right.
in that manner making these connections. Are the only
Right. Well, my heart leapt when I turned in and saw the de Hirsch Margulies drawings. There are a bunch of things that have never seen the light of day, and that's true. That I love. De Hirsch Margulies, he was maybe here on the line. Someone had these. They're great pictures, And at times I remember that coming in the collection. Also, the early Betty Parsons, have you focused on? That's on Joe's red wall there. This is one she did on her honeymoon in Paris in 1914. Incredible that was given to us by the estate, really. But this fabulous gouache that just sums up, the south of France in the 20s or whatever. These things look great. And I'm sure even the artists who admittedly saw small things in a database at some times and came back and looked, but many times, it would be things that they just on faith thought, this is great, let's get this out. I think it's a fabulous show. I can't wait to see installments 2 and 3. It's really, really interesting, though. It really is. And knowing the artists but it's, I think it's, for me, it's those works that have really never, I don't think, ever been shown in some cases, and that someone, that's what you do when you advocate for something to come in the collection. You're going to say, the context is there. Someday you'll know. Someday it will effloresce and it will get into a show in a way. You don't collect things that you hope sit in a drawer for 40 years. But that's great. No, thank you. And of course, talking about the artists who responded, previously, like Fred or Barbara, who that's always when artists come in and look at the collection. It's just a brilliant idea. Brilliant. Thank you, Monica. That's Monica. Oh, all right. Well, thank you all. Those of you, I know this is not easy. I went Memorial Day weekend on Friday. Forget it. No one will come. But you did. Thank you. I love you all.